Okay, so I am actually going to read section 26 because I think that's a really important provision for you to read or know. It says, subject to this act, the regulations and the bylaws, the council must exercise the powers and perform the duties of the Strata Corporation, including the enforcement of bylaws and rules. So that, I think, emphasizes Sean's point that really it's the Strata Council that does the physical actions to make the Strata Corporation do what it needs to do. But there's important words in that definition or in that provision in the Act, and that's the subject to this Act, the regulations and the bylaws. And what you see here in this slide here is that what those words mean is that not everything is decided by the Strata Council. So subject to the Act means that in some situations the Act requires the owners to approve something, or the Act may impose some limitations on the council's powers. So while yes, the council is the operating machine for the Strata Corporation, you really have to take a look at the Act and the bylaws and the regulations to see what those limits on the council's powers are and what those powers are actually mean. So one of the things that I like to say about Strata Councils is that they do the heavy lifting. So they are the managing body of the Strata Corporation. They do the day-to-day functions. They are responsible for a wide variety of items, including the enforcement of bylaws. And note that section 26 specifically highlighted as one of the council's duties the enforcement of bylaws. Like amongst all of the duties that they had, the one thing that they highlighted in section 26 is that enforcement of bylaws, which I think suggests to me that that is actually a very important function for Strata Councils. The other thing that councils do is they implement the budgets and the resolutions. So they implement the will of the owners. So you have these general meetings, the ownership approved by majority vote your budgets, and the council then implements those budgets. They have now up to a certain amount of money for each category of expense to do the things that need to be done to run your Strata Corporation. So you might have a $50,000 line item for repair and maintenance. The council makes the decisions as to how that repair and maintenance item is spent. The owners decide how much, the council decides how and the priorities necessary. And that's where you see that divide between the council doing the day-to-day work, whereas a Strata Corporation as a whole gives or empowers the council to do that work. Same thing with resolutions. You have either majority vote resolutions or 3/4 vote resolutions. You can have a 3/4 vote resolution that authorizes the Strata Corporation to spend a certain amount of money from the CRF or to impose a special levy. Similarly, it's the council that implements that. So they're the ones that go and decide which contractor gets hired, pays the bills on those contractors if they're repair and maintenance items, and they're the ones that implement the special levies, make sure the funds get collected, and issue the refund if there is a refund at the end of the day when not all the money is spent. So that's again an example of where the Strata Corporation gives sort of general authority to the council, but the council does the implementation, the day-to-day with respect to those issues. Now again, it's important to note that the council's powers are limited by having to comply with the Strata Corporation's directions, bylaws, and a wide variety of legislation. So you have examples like, if, let's say, there's a majority vote resolution put forward at a general meeting that directs the council which repair method to go down the road of, or that might direct the council on which contractor to hire. That's possible. Sometimes Strata Councils ask for those directions, and owners can then direct the council, and then they are required to comply with those directions. Similarly, there's bylaws. The bylaws require the Strata Council to do certain things, and the Strata Council is required to comply with those bylaws. And then there's all sorts of other legislation. You've got, in the enforcement of bylaws, for example, you could have human rights code issues come up, and the Strata Council must comply with the human rights code in implementing their decisions with respect to enforcing bylaws. When doing repair and maintenance, the council is going to be limited in what they can do because they're going to have to think of all of the WorkSafe BC issues that are involved with repair and maintenance. So there's a lot of different legislation that comes into play, and there's a lot of things that impact the council's decision making. And that's why I say that they have the heavy lifting, right? The general ownership makes these very general decisions, but it's the council that has to do all the work to implement those decisions. There is the ability to delegate some of those council's duties, and if you have bylaws that allow you to do that delegation. So under the standard bylaws, it provides that the council can delegate any of its powers and duties subject to one exception. And it can be anything from decision-making powers, and you'll see that with committees. You might have a landscaping committee that's created by the council, and it can be an advisory committee, but it can also be a committee that's given the power to make decisions. And you'll see that where maybe the landscaping committee is told, you can decide which plants are going to be put in, and they make that decision and let the council know, and the council authorizes it. And also the council could delegate even the spending ability to that landscaping committee. There is provisions in the bylaws that will say, as long as you provide the parameters and you say, have a resolution of the council that sets out how much is spent and how much they can be spent and what those parameters or limits may be, that committee can actually make spending decisions and implement those spending decisions. So it really, that delegation can be done. I often don't see it. Usually the committees that I see are advisory committees that are put forward, but even that, it can be very helpful to a strata council in doing that heavy lifting that they have to do. The one exception to the delegating is they can't delegate its powers to determine whether a person has contravened a bylaw or a rule. So that is entirely council's decision. That cannot be delegated. Whether a person should be fined and the amount of the fine, that also cannot be delegated. That is entirely within the council's purview. And whether a person should be denied access to a recreational facility, that too is entirely within the council's purview. And so that really is telling us that the enforcement of bylaws, yet again, is a really important duty of the council that only the council can take on.